So welcome again to Talking Through Hamlet. Today I've got a live audience. I'm in the room with two actual students. They may even have questions, so we'll roll with it. We're going to look at the scene, Act 4, Scene 4, in which Hamlet has a monologue, a soliloquy, in which he appears resolved, finally, on the plan of vengeance. Finally. When we look at it, one thing I want to notice about the whole scene is that it's yet another instance when Hamlet has a revealing encounter with somebody who is far from his social equal. Now, you could argue that most people are far from being Hamlet's social equal, but sometimes they are particularly revealing and set him in a way that he should have been pursuing a long time ago. For example, he meets player one, and that makes him think that had he but cause, just think what he could do. And if Hamlet was feeling something, or if the actor were feeling something as acute as Hamlet's pain, he would drown the stage and cleave the general ear. Here, Hamlet meets a captain. Later on, he'll meet a gravedigger. He will also meet Osric. But here he meets the captain, and like with his encounter with the player, the captain and the many men at his command make him realize something profound about his situation in relation to humanity in general. So here is the captain. I just want to pick up on some of the dismissive, even mocking aspects of the captain's language. As ever, you hear Hamlet tuning into that. So when we see, how purposed, sir, I pray you, is the other men of Norway against some part of Poland. Note that dismissive, that dismissive, indefinite kind of pronoun, like I don't know what. Look at the way the captain speaks as well. When asked, when Hamlet proposes that this land must be important because the Polish seem to be garrisoning it quite hard. And the captain's answer is quite memorable. Look at the way he speaks. To pay 5 ducats. 5! I would not farm it. You can hear the emphasis there with that obvious repetition. Again, being dismissive about the whole campaign and quite subversive. It gives you a sense that the rulers of whatever country, be it Norway, Poland, or Denmark itself, are quite out of touch with the bitterness felt by the lower orders. You'll see it again with the gravedigger. This gives Hamlet pause. This gives him a cause to reflect. 2,000 souls and 20,000 ducats. And you begin to appreciate the importance of numbers in this scene. Numbers both conveying the mass of humanity, to put it crudely. You'll notice that at such stages when we do that, I do a kind of ballot box really to reflect the kind of relationship between the rulers and the ruled. You get that sense of their facelessness and Hamlet's absolute shock that there are so many who are going to go to their graves. This brings us to the soliloquy here. I want to say a few things about the soliloquy before we get started on it. Perhaps the most significant is that when Hamlet appeared in print after Shakespeare's death, that is to say in the folio edition of 1623, this speech was not in it. And that's a little historical insight, but it's worth noting that the critic James Shapiro observes that this was an insight into Shakespeare's creative process. That what you get is Shakespeare deciding that he didn't need this speech because the motivation was already set up. He's already sprung the mousetrap, if you see what I mean. He's already seen the play within the play. He's already said, now will I drink hot blood. He's already killed Polonius thinking he was the king. I took thee for thy better. So in a way, he doesn't need this speech and he doesn't need the prompting, and the play is quite long enough as it is. But I do think this speech is fascinating for what it says about Hamlet and, as I've hinted already, his role in society, his relationship with other human beings. It's not just that we meet them, and it's not just that there are 20,000 of them. If you've seen or remember Kenneth Branagh's film version, you see them rather ridiculously beginning to surge or beginning to march in little tiny ant-like shapes, creeping forward in the snow, as Kenneth Branagh raises his arms heavenwards in a heroic posture. It's not just that. It's also, I think, that it shows Hamlet's quite courtly way of thinking. That his brain is quite conditioned by the expectations of the state. You'll see I've written here in the margin, Cicero de Officiis. And why I've put that there is because Cicero, late in his life, when he was trying to defend the values of the Republic in the face of what was going to become the Empire, wrote a book called On Duties. And he felt it was a timely way in to see how you could use philosophy to get yourself through practical situations. Now, Hamlet, the masterly overthinker, here overthinks himself into a kind of oblivion. And I'm going to give you some examples. But there are some really key moments when he reflects a way of thinking that was consistent with the court of his time. If you look at writers like Jonathan Bate or Rhodri Lewis, they're very preoccupied with the idea that Hamlet was thinking what other people were thinking. Rhodri Lewis saying that he is kind of corrupted by the state that fails to live up to these ideals. So when we look, and I promise I won't do it absolutely chronologically line by line, but how all occasions do inform against me and spur my dull revenge. That's a reminder that Hamlet has had similar encounters before. Gosh, I should know by now, he's thinking to himself. And then, but his next line, what is a man if his chief good and market of his time be but to sleep and feed? A beast, no more. Now, in Cicero's book, he's very keen to point out that men, and I mean, he mostly means men because Stoics almost exclusively did, because, we'll get to that. But Cicero believed that men were capable of reason, that brought them above the kind of lower ranks, the lower bits of Maslow's pyramids of need. Not that he knew what that was, but that he actually said that we have reason. Now, Hamlet says that he needs to use his reason to be able to think himself into the position to do what he has to do. But I love looking at the language with which he does it. Look at the clauses, the subclauses, and again, the crazy numbers of this sentence. Now, whether it be bestial oblivion, as a reference back to Cicero's words, or some craven scruple of thinking too precisely on the event. Now, thinking too precisely on the event, I could say en passant, is very symptomatic of the way Hamlet thinks. And if you're thinking of him as the great overthinker, the procrastinator who brings so much reason to the problem that he's incapable of doing it, well, there's a little piece of evidence. And look, in a subclause, a little aside, he says, a thought which quartered hath but one part wisdom and ever 3 parts coward. Why on earth, I'm sometimes thinking, is Hamlet actually dividing his head into 4 parts? Arguing that, yes, at least one part of his head is wise to think that he shouldn't take action, and the other 3 quarters are simply being expedient, or as Falstaff says in another play, discretion is the better part of valour. You know, you might want to be brave, but knowing not to be is quite useful sometimes. He also says that he can do this thing, but he has cause and will and strength and means to do it, but he needs the army to motivate him. Now, again, with the contrast here, he's comparing his individual state, his kind of lonely vision, with the absolute pointlessness, or the absolute lack of point that there is in this battle. The point being that there's every reason why Hamlet should be doing what he's got to do, absolutely no reason why these men should go to their own deaths, and that's a massive contrast. And yet they do it without questioning, and he even takes time to mock Fortinbras, who will also risk his own death and his people for something apparently insignificant. He mocks him as a delicate and tender prince, you ought to know, whose spirit with a divine ambition puffs makes mouths at the invisible event. So he's constantly comparing that to the list of things that he has to contend with. And it's a contrast. I have a father killed, a mother stained, excitements of my reason and my blood. This somehow is worse than the political problems that Fortinbras is trying to resolve with his army. So there's that contrast. And the very strange thing, there's a very difficult sentence here, this one. In this difficult sentence here, Hamlet begins to sympathize with Fortinbras's impulse to do something very glamorous, very heroic, and very pointless. The easiest translation of that sentence, and I do say translation because it could go at least two different ways, but the simplest translation I could offer is that a correct understanding of what it means to be great is to take a proper issue, a proper principled issue when there's really nothing at stake, rather than to stir yourself when there's a big important thing. So don't worry, don't wait for a great argument before you stir, but find quarrel in a straw if honour's at stake. That's his advice. And the rest of his rhetoric is entirely tuned to that. When he looks at the imminent death of 20,000 men, that for a fantasy or trick of fame go to their graves like beds. That absolutely charming image, and the way in which he repeats himself, and then fights for plot wherein the numbers cannot try the cause. Bear in mind again that he's already cited that number. He's repeated it: the imminent death of 20,000 men, and that in itself is enough to motivate him for the next part of the tragedy. He's now ready to leave for England and is safely on the emotional journey to become the resigned killer, the thinker suddenly aware of mortality, and the man who's kind of sacked spiritual concerns for much more practical ones.